Thanks to the BIC team for having me here. And thanks, Leah, for agreeing to respond to the book. It's a bit of a homecoming because I've never actually spoken about my work in front of my family, so I'm really glad they'll have the opportunity to see it or to hear what I'm going to say. And it's, so the book kind of comes out of a kind of a long work with sorry, I saw my, and I just want to acknowledge my niece Ria, who's come, and hopefully the book will inspire her to have curiosity about the world as well. So the book is interested in ways in which people who are accused of terrorist crimes come to inhabit the space of law, right? And terrorist crimes, which are thought of as the kind of the most heinous of crimes, there's a lot of discourses and narratives of violence, of torture, of long years of incarceration, decades of incarceration, after which you are proved to be innocent and acquitted. So maybe just some background about the UAPA, or the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which is the primary anti-terror law in India at the moment. So we kind of have a general sense in India that the UAP, or the anti-terror law, is being used not to charge people not to stamp out terrorism, but is being used to target minority populations and to target democracy rights activists. Right. So that's the general sense we have. And just to flesh this out a bit more, some recent research that we've been doing since 2014. There have been about 3,500 people arrested under the UAPA charges, right? 78% of those people have been Muslim, which is a disproportionate amount of people compared to the population. Most are not for violent crimes. Most are for crimes of membership, of speech. So things that you think of terrorism, that isn't your normal, that isn't what people are being accused of. And the kind of the history of anti-terror laws shows that these laws are not something that's used to deal with an exceptional moment in time. They're periodically used over and over again. So the book seeks to make kind of two departures from kind of scholarly literature on anti-terror laws. The one thing is to think about the state of exception. So people talk about the state of exception or exceptional laws in different ways. And so one obvious way, in a milieu of grinding terror trials, in a milieu of torture, in a milieu of where people spend years and years, if not decades, in incarceration, is to go down the idea of the state of exception. Right? The problem with that historical narrative is that you have these terror trials repeatedly coming into fore. So it's not so much a way of dealing with an exceptional situation as it is about dealing with controlling populations, about clamping down on certain sets of people that the government of the day does not like. The second reason why I don't go down the way of thinking about the kind of the narratives of exception, the narratives of violence, is because if you go into a courtroom, what actually is actually the core of any trial is these technical things. So when you're even in instances where there's vast violence, where there are issues at stake which are somehow kind of excite passions, the issues are still very technical. Was a document signed properly? Was a lawyer's objection properly recorded by the stenographer? Was an evidence properly submitted with proper certification? So it is these technical, these small details that form the center or the heart of the book, even in a terrorism trial, right? And so it's these details that form the preoccupation with how people understand the law and the actual practice of law. So I frame this idea of the technical in three ways. The first way is to think about the etymological root of the word technical, right, of the technicality. So the word technical comes from the Greek techne, which is a form of knowledge that is gained by doing something, right? So when one of my ethnographic interlocutors, he basically said, he told me as I did my fieldwork in Delhi's courts, that I may have akshar gyan, that is, I have trained in the law, I can write out the law, but he has anubhav gyan, or experiential knowledge, right? So it's this form of knowledge that emerges from a certain practice of law, and it's a form of knowledge that emerges with experience. The second way I think about technical is this idea of knowledge that is socially held, that's held by communities of people within the jail. So in Delhi at least, and this is still the same situation, because all terror accused are considered high security prisoners, whether you've been accused of a violent crime or a crime of speech, so something like hypothetically a part of India should be free, right? That is considered a terrorist crime. So all of these people are kept in the same high security ward, regardless of the actual security threat that they pose. But what happened in those high security wards is that knowledge was shared. So in the book, I talk about an instance where the prosecution had failed to engage with a certain procedure. The one terror accused realized this, filed an application, was acquitted or discharged of the case, and similar applications were filed by different people in the same who emerged from the same jail cell, and from the same ward, excuse me, right? So this idea of knowledge that's socially held. The third way I think about technical is to think about, I mean, one can say these are boring things. Who cares if a document is signed properly? Who cares if something is not signed appropriately, right? But these things are really, they excite passions, right? It's an element of human voice in a certain sense, right? So behind every document, right? Because you can hear people when they talk about it, they say this document was fabricated, right? So this document is fabricated is actually a small thing. I mean, it's not a small thing, but it's quite a technical thing, right? The signature was forged, the Xerox was taken badly, etc., right? But there's a certain passion behind it. There's a certain animation that comes when people talk about technicalities during the course of the trial process, right? And so what the book kind of tries to do in the last sense of the word technical is to think of the technical as a way through which human voice, human passions, desires, demands, vulnerabilities, infelicities all come to bear, right? So the law becomes an avenue for these aspects of human voice. So as a way of kind of sketching out these three dimensions of the technical, I want to narrate one story that I came across during my fieldwork. And it's about a story of a person who I call Qayyum. In 2011, a trial court acquitted Qayyum and 6 other co-accused of terrorism-related offenses, including possession of firearms, impersonating public officials, an attempt to murder a police officer. Several men were accused of coming to Delhi from Kashmir in order to carry out terrorist attacks. That's the police narrative. So according to the police narrative, what was happening, or what the occurrence was, is the special cell, that's a special cell of the Delhi police, received information that, from a secret informer, that a certain person, a number of people would be coming to commit these terrorist acts on the outside. They would be coming via a certain highway into Delhi, and they were also given the registration number. According to the police, they set up barricades, the car approached, the car sped away, the police gave chase, and there was this, and then there was a shootout. In the shootout, none of the police vehicles were hit by bullets, right? And there's also a scene in the final judgments where a police officer allegedly ran over there, picked up a grenade and threw it over there, but the grenade never exploded. So there's almost cinematic idea of what was happening in a terrorist, in a terror event, right? And so what happened thereafter, according to the police, is that the people who were arrested at that spot where the encounter took place, is that they gave information that this person, Qayyum, who I came to know, was arriving at New Delhi railway station. The police then said they went to New Delhi railway station and arrested Qayyum and others. They say they got vast amounts of money, fake currency, ammunition, etc., and the allegation was that they're working on behest of Pakistan's ISI. So the defense of Qayyum and his co-accused was the entire story was fabricated. The entire story, the car chase, the shootout, the way they were arrested was entirely fabricated. Qayyum says, and he has some documents to back this up, that he was actually abducted by the Kashmir police and then transferred to the Delhi police 6 days before the actual event, right? And so but Qayyum needed a way to figure out how to prove this, right? What ultimately happened in the case is that Qayyum and his co-accused were all acquitted. The trial judge in the trial court asked the Delhi police to commence charges of fabrication of evidence and other perjury charges against the police officers. So this judgment was made possible primarily due to or one of the reasons why the judgment was made possible was because of the efforts of Qayyum and his co-accused. So Qayyum, I mean, in my interviews with Qayyum, he told me how this happened, how he got acquitted. So Qayyum realized that the first moment when he went to court, the issue was one of a linguistic one, of understanding the law. It was as if this law was alien to him. They spoke in language that was not amenable to understanding. And anyone who's been to a courtroom will often know that you do not know what people are saying in the courtroom. It's an alien language, right? And they also did not ultimately trust their lawyers. They believed that the lawyers were on the take from the Delhi police, that the lawyers would kind of cut deals with them, acquittal there, conviction here, bail here, no bail there. So that was kind of what motivated Qayyum to start learning the language of the law. And then they realized, Qayyum and his co-accused realized slowly, that in order to be acquitted, in order to gain something from the court, they would have to learn the law and do the work for themselves. So the first hurdle, as I said, was an issue of language. They did not understand what was being said in the charge sheet against him, right? They didn't understand legal language, but also given the fact that charge sheets in Delhi are written in Hindi and English, and they only could read and write Urdu, that was the major problem. So what they did was, it was a slow process of collaborative translation of the documents. So what they would do, basically, is one person who knew a little bit of Hindi, he would read it out in Hindi. They would transcribe it in Urdu. Someone would know English. They would translate that out into English. And I'll just read out a bit of, and this is what they did for every document that was formed part of the case. And I'll just read this bit out of the interview I did with him. I don't understand English that much, but whatever I could, I read and I tried to understand. Some of the boys could not read Hindi, so someone used to read it out in Hindi, and I would write it down in Urdu. Then I would read it out to my friend, and he would write it down in English. Like this, we translated into English and Urdu to English, because if people cannot read the documents, the case itself is bad. People have a right and should know what is written in the law, in law books, right? So over here, you can already get a sense of his anger at not being able to read. So this idea of passion comes about here as well. So what Qayyum, as they kind of translated the court documents, what they slowly realized was that the entire case was built on a series of logbooks. So what this means that if the police officer receives secret information, that needs to be maintained in something called a daily diary. If a police officer leaves the police station, they need to make an entry in the daily diary. Similarly, when they come back into the police station, they need to make an entry into the daily diary. If they take out ammunition, that needs to be registered in the ammunition logbook. If they take out a gun, that needs to be registered in the arms logbook. If a vehicle goes somewhere else, you get where I'm going with this, right? So every single thing needs to be, every single document, every single thing that the police did needs to be documented somewhere. So they realized that the entire case is built on these documents. So it's built on these small, like insignificant logbooks. And so then they began this multi-year effort to get copies of these documents. The Delhi police did not submit the original documents, right? So the aim of Qayyum and his co-accused was to file these was to get access to these documents. So crucial to this success was the RTI, or the Right to Information Act. So they used RTI applications to get access to these logbooks. And again, I just want to read out how they came to know about the RTI Act. One night we were watching the news. There was a TV in jail. So then we saw the news and we heard that the RTI law had come into force. After that, we asked our lawyers to bring a book. We read it a bit by bit. We translated it bit by bit. And we realized that the RTI letter is like a patar ki lakir, or line in the stone, or something that's impossible to change. No one can lie in it. We started in 2006, but we did not get any response. And then in 2010, 2009, we started getting responses. And so little by little, through this slow process of translation, from Urdu to Hindi, then to English, and then back again. They were able to write out these RTI applications. And again, he says, my English is bad, so my co-accused, he knew English, he wrote it out. We sat together and decided what to write and what to ask for. We used to write it out first in Urdu, and then he would write it out in English. Then we gave it to our lawyer, and who submitted it. So Qayyum and his co-accused asked for documents that the police's case was built on. So for example, if Qayyum was arrested at the railway station, the railway police should have an entry somewhere that Qayyum was arrested here, right? If you're arresting someone else in a police of one jurisdiction is arresting from another jurisdiction, the police need to enter something in the logbook there. So they attempted to get these documents out. I'll read out again what he said about the RTI Act. He received the RTI applications, and then this is what he says about the replies to the RTI applications. The police officer's statement in the charge sheet said that one day he received information from a secret informer that a terrorist is coming by rail and that he and other police took certain cars to the railway station. He reached the railway station and caught me near the Gurudwara. That police name and vehicle number are written in the RTI Act, in the charge sheet. I filed an RTI naming the relevant policeman. I said, give me the daily diary entry about these policemen. The DD entry showed that the police officers who allegedly were on duty arresting me were off on duty somewhere else. The vehicles that were used to arrest me were on Thane detail somewhere else. Some of them had gone to Sangam Vihar. None of them had gone to the railway station. I filed an RTI with the Paharganj police station, and they said, that's the police station where he was arrested from, the jurisdiction where he was arrested from. They said, we have no such record. We have no such record of any incident. If a militant is caught, then there is a red alert. Wouldn't the police force know? Wouldn't the Paharganj police force know if there was a terrorist who was caught? That answer also came. Then we put all the paper together and produced it before the judge. We completely destroyed the witnesses. We cross-examined the witnesses ourselves. The RTI application replies contained the logbook, which showed that the arrest of officer who arrested Qayyum was not on duty that day. You can't change the logbook. They copied the logbook, put a seal on it, and sent it to us. The same with the DD entry. They copied it, put a seal on it, and sent it to us. And so from this brief narrative, I just want to think about some points of the technical, right? So this idea that I want to talk about it more with Leah as well, is this idea of intimacy that emerges, right? So law is not this distant thing that's coming from elsewhere. It's not this eagle that's swooping above us. But over here, there's an idea of you're building a certain intimacy with legal texts and legal procedures. You're doing the slow work of translating, slow work of reading, right? So it's almost as if there are potters with clay or woodworkers with wood. They're using their hands to build a certain idea of knowledge, right? But this knowledge is dangerous. They knew, even though Qayyum has this bravado, and we can probably grant him that because he was finally acquitted and the judge ordered a prosecution of the police officers, they knew that anything they do could rebound against them. That whatever actions they did could have potentially bad consequences for their case, right? The second thing about this idea of the technical is to think about how legal knowledge is produced. So we often think of the repositories of legal knowledge as being courts, legislators, high commentators of law. But what emerges over here is an idea that legal knowledge is produced in everyday settings. It's this idea that I can speak in the same voice of a judge. I can speak with the same authority of someone in the legislature, right? So I can produce legal knowledge by working with these technical details. In the book, I call this recycled legality. It's, I guess, something else we can think about, but we can talk about later. But it's this idea that I'm putting together things. It's not this idea I'm learning from teachers and therefore I know the law, but rather it's through an experiential, through kind of an everyday feeling around of the kind of legal text, and I'm able to produce legal meaning and legal knowledge. The third aspect of the technical that I think emerges over here is this concern with paperwork. So we all know that paperwork does not just document reality, right? The idea of a false confession means that I did not make the confession, nevertheless, I am said to have produced one, right? So it's this idea of a fake reality that's being produced. What happens over here is that terror accused defendants are exploiting this capacity of documents to produce reality, of documents to produce truth. So in order to undermine the truth value produced by the police, they are producing their own truths. The last aspect of the technical that I'd like to draw attention to is to think about the passionate, what Stanley Cavell, the philosopher of language, calls the perlocutory dimension of language, right? So language is a mode of claim making, of demanding, of expressing vulnerabilities, right? So what is at stake in the technical is an ability to imagine a certain future. What is the future that you are demanding? What is the claim that you are making against someone? What is the mode of vulnerability that you're expressing? So these aspects of these passionate ideas of language come through the technical. So the technical is a place where human voice emerges. Right? So to engage with the technical is not just to say your signature was misplaced. It's to articulate a certain demand, it's to articulate a certain desire, it's to persuade, it's to articulate an idea of vulnerability. And so the law is a peculiar form of language that allows this to happen. And maybe the last point I'll make, because I realize we're living in a different time from when the book was written. Right? So what does it mean to have look for life, to return to the subtitle of the presentation? What does it mean to look for life in a place of devastation? People are in the book I speak about one person who was in jail for 14 years. He was arrested as a teenager and finally acquitted after 14 years. He spent 14 years of his formative period of life in prison. Right? And it's a heartbreaking narrative. But what does it mean to look for life in a place where you might only see death and destruction? We can only see a degraded form of life. So I would argue, right? So you can one mode of responding to that is to think of high constitutional terms: right to life and liberty, right to freedom of expression, right to dignity, etc., etc. Another mode, I would argue, is looking downwards. Right? Looking at the mundane technical aspects of the law that allow you to recover a way in which to inhabit the space of the law. And this is particularly important in the present moment where India finds itself in a very dark place. So it was very inspiring during the CAA protest where people recited the Constitution, right, in public together. Right? And that's one mode of inhabiting, of claiming a space. Another mode of claiming a space is a return to the technical, where people might see exception and violence. It's the technical that allows people to claim against the state in these very dark times. So thank you very much for that. I hope this gives you a flavor of the book, and I really look forward to the discussion with Leah and with the rest of you.
Thanks, Mayur. That was a great presentation. This is a great book. I urge all of you to buy it. The publisher has set up a stall outside. It's of interest not just to legal scholars like me, but to anyone, and it's not written in legal jargon, so it's of interest to everyone. As somebody who studies the justice system very deeply, there's a huge dearth of ethnographic work on the legal system in India. A lot of the work is by legal academicians, and we don't see a lot of academic work on the everyday life in the courts. You know, what are the relationships between the various people who inhabit these spaces? You know, the court staff, the munshis, lawyers. We only hear of, you know, of trials and judgments and things like that. So in that sense, this is a really interesting book. So maybe I'll begin, Mayur, with at the beginning. What motivated you to take up this subject? And also, why did you choose Tees Hazari as the site for your research?
So I guess for me, like so I used to work at ALF in Bangalore. And at that time in 2006, there were lots of people being arrested for UAPA, nothing on the scale of what we're seeing now. And so that kind of excited my interest in UAPA, anti-terror laws. And then a friend and a colleague, Jawahar Raja, was defending the Students' Islamic Movement of India, or SIMI, before a tribunal. And he asked me if I'd want to join him. And I said, yes, it's a great learning opportunity, so I did. And I think what happened after that is because we won for 12 hours the case of Simi, before it was stayed by the Supreme Court, Jawahar started getting lots of requests to do terror defense to UAPA cases. So that kind of it was just really intriguing because you go with a certain sense of that the court is going to be obsessed with issues of religious identity, of freedom of expression, freedom of association, prosecution of minorities. But the actual everyday of court is obsessed with these documents and signatures and stamps and files and stuff like that. Why did I do it in Tisazari? Simply because most of the cases at the time were in Tisazari courts. It's also a fertile ethnographic space. Was Asia's largest court complex. Has all those like epithets attached to it. So it's quite an atmospheric place. But the simple reason is that at that time, all of the judges dealing with special cell cases sat in Tisazari courts. There was one murder case that had a terrorism angle to it, which was in Saket, which I also followed.
Another aspect of the book that I found very interesting is this aspect of custodial intimacy. We think of terror suspects, actually not just terror suspects, suspects in any criminal case and law enforcement agencies as being adversaries. Obviously, we would think that terror accused would hate, detest these people who have put them in this position and would not be able to deal with them normally, person to person. But what, Mayur, you found in your book is that that's not true. There is a certain degree of camaraderie. And my instinctive reaction to that, again, was maybe this is Stockholm Syndrome. Yeah. But what you found is that it's not. If you could just unpack that a little for us.
So I guess there are two ways of thinking about it. So one way, just to narrate what happened in the book is, during the Simi tribunal hearings, I came to know a person called Yasin Bhai, who is a very funny person. But he was the Gujarat president of Simi. He also was also based in Delhi for a period of time. And we would go to the tribunal hearings, and he started hugging the government officials who banned his organization, people who arrested him and imprisoned him. He was convicted by a trial court of sedition and membership of a terrorist organization. But he would go hug them, hang out with them, joke with them, talk about when they're going to have biryani next together, stuff like that. So that part was just confounding to me. The other part is that, like, as I did my field work, as this human rights angle, right? You go thinking that police are the evil devil, and they're not happy characters, they're not savory characters. But I guess what happens is that you find that police are complicated people. That actually, some of them are quite funny, some of them are quite genuine. And it's difficult. Well, it's difficult to pass out kind of the nice aspects and the really disturbing aspects of the personalities. So I think I'm kind of coming at it at two angles. So there's a moment in the book, I'll give you a spoiler, where basically there's this really amazing conversation between this person accused of murdering a police officer and the police officer. They're both talking about life and death, love, friendship, and it's really interesting conversation about what it means to, very ethical conversation about it, right? And there was a certain amount of care there and a certain amount of friendship, but moments later, the police officer gets up. No, before that, the police officer tells the guy, "You'll definitely be acquitted. There's no hard evidence against you here, so don't worry about it too much." Then he goes up, he gets summoned as a witness, and said, "Yes, I saw him shoot my colleague," right? And so it's these moments I'm trying to understand. It's not. It's still difficult to wrap my head around what it means to be friends with someone who's accusing you of murder. But I guess what ultimately people say is that, we've been in jail for 14 years. What else do you expect me to do? I meet this guy every day, or every time I come to court, he's my conduit to the outside world in a sense. He knows my family, he knows everything. So it's a long, like a weird rishta almost, like a long relationship that you build up with the police officers that kind of goes between violence and care. So it's kind of the enmeshing of these two things that I try to make sense of with this idea of custodial intimacy.
From the police side, why do you think, so as you've described in your book, there are multiple law enforcement agency personnel who know that these cases are fabricated, who know that they are lying on the stand, but they still go through with it. So what do you think are the incentives, disincentives within law enforcement that create this?
So there's definitely an incentive built into the system, in a sense. So one of the people who I talk about in the book is a guy called Bandhari. He if you go to Indian Qanun and Google his real name, which I can't give you right now, you will find that he filed an application for promotion which was denied. His application for promotion said that he had arrested so many terror accused, he had killed so many people in an encounter, and other things, right? So there's an element there's an incentive element built into it, but also there may be like, so it's also puzzling to me, right? It also could be a turf war thing. So there's one that the Delhi police and the Bombay police hate each other, right? So they keep on arresting each other's informants as accused. And so that is one thing. In order to get back at the Bombay police, they arrest one of their informants and say, actually, he's a prime accused in this terror offense. So there's that as well. So it's almost like this gang warfare type thing. So it's a war of attrition almost. Like you try and get as many people from the other side as possible. But let's say even if the person is not and doesn't fall to any one of these categories, I'm not sure. I really don't know why police sometimes arrest people. They may be guilty, which is why they arrest them. But so it's difficult to pass that out. I don't know. There was one moment where they've arrested this Maoist, the person who was accused of being Maoist, and the police officer was actually kind of sad to arrest the person. He says, if they took away my land, if they took away my home, if they evicted me from my home, even I would pick up a gun. What else do you expect me to do? But this is my job, so I have to do it. So it's this idea of this regularity, this is just what I have to do in order to get in my job. And I think that's probably the sense I got.
Yeah, the regularity and, this is business as usual. And in some sense, there are incentives for, there are targets that they have for arrests, things like that.
Yeah.
So this turf war that you mentioned, this was one of the funny things in his book. So Mayur's book is not just a grim account of terror trials. There's a lot of dark humor in it. And a section that I really enjoyed was the one on rumors. And the rumors that make the police sound really omnipotent and omnipresent. So there was also a really funny incident of the microchip. So maybe you can just describe that.
So I guess just in the point of humor, it's a lot of gallows humor that happens in the thing. So they're constantly talking about who's going to die first, who's going to get acquitted first. Like is that type of humor. Yasin Bhai, he once asked me, "Do you know why Muslims have five children?" I said, "No. Why do they have 5 children? One will get arrested, one will be encountered, one will get something else, one will get something else. I need at least one to take care of me in my old age." So it's that type of humor that comes out a lot. But this is not that instance of that. So in the book I talk about how, so you have legal knowledge, but this legal knowledge is always kind of influenced or can't be separated from this idea of rumor of what is happening in the courtroom. So the instance that Leah is talking about is I'm in the courtroom and I'm just following a particular case. It's a case of membership. He was accused of being a member of a Kashmiri terrorist organization, not accused of violence or anything else like that. And then I follow the lawyer and I follow the accused, the defendant's brother-in-law back to the chambers. And to cut a long story short, they say that what has happened is he's innocent, but whatever he did because the special cell made him do it. So I'm like, how do you know the special cell made him do it? Because they implanted a microchip into his head. And I'm like, oh, how do you know they implanted what do you mean a microchip inside his head? And then the guy had a scar on his head over here. And they said, you can see the scar, that's where they put the microchip. So I was like, and I'm completely flabbergasted because I don't know how to respond to this. Someone says a microchip in the head. And the lawyer is saying this, right? And they said, yeah, because the microchip, they do this and they send messages to the guy and he does all of this stuff. And he says all of this stuff. And I'm like, okay, I'm like completely flabbergasted because I don't know how to respond to this. Like, and I'm just taking down notes and I'm taking down notes. But what I found later is that not just this guy's defense in the trial court was that a microchip made him do it. But that the story had spread. Everyone was talking about that microchip case in the jail, in the courtroom. This guy who I came to know, this reporter who I came to know, called me and asked me, have you heard about the microchip case? So it's this darkness to it. It's very funny. It's hard not to laugh, but it's also darkness, right? This idea that the police can do these things, right? So some people would say, refuse to say money on the phone because they believe the police would do something, right? So this idea of that you're constantly being watched, that you're constantly under surveillance, it's almost like this jittery, nervous reaction you have, right? So it's ridiculous, but it's not ridiculous. I mean, in a milieu where people are constantly being like, kind of have cameras in different angles, it's difficult not to think that a microchip is making you do it.
Yeah. And I mean, what was most interesting was that this wasn't just gossip in the corridors, this was in the pleadings.
Yeah. So this was defense. It made it into the judgment. The guy was acquitted because of lack of evidence, as most terror cases are, but it made it into the courtroom. So clearly, the lawyer had downloaded, the lawyer believed it, the brother-in-law believed it, everyone believed it. And so it's not, the question is not whether it's irrational. The question is, what kind of power does the police represent that makes you think that this is possible?
Exactly. That even the judge hearing it didn't say, I mean, what are you saying?
Yeah, he just recorded it.
He just recorded it.
It's in the judgment.
Yeah, it's in the judgment. Yeah. Now, just going back to something that you mentioned during your presentation about documents and, all these certification processes. So in India, our lives are ruled by documentation. I call it like death by documentation. We are always being asked to produce identity documentation, which has to be attested, signed, notarized. And in the legal system, this is particularly acute. So if you could just explain that a little bit.
So I guess, as you said, everyone knows that we all are like, there's a surfeit of documents, what's happening, right? But what happens in many cases, well, I'll narrate the Kashmir case first. So in the Kashmir case, what happened was this, it's a standard encounter narrative, right? The police arrest a person accused of being a terrorist. The person in this particular case alleged to have, was guiding them to a hideout. The hideout was rigged with booby traps. The guy died, right? It's a standard encounter narrative. Either the person shoots and is shot back by the police, or the guy dies because of a booby trap, right? To cut a long story short, what happened differently in this particular case, the case is called Masooda Parveen, which is the man's wife. So Masooda Parveen filed a case because what happened is that unlike many other cases, for some reason, we're not sure why, the police ordered an inquest as to the cause of death. So the cause of death, according to a snippet somewhere else in the inquest, was that this was an unnatural death caused due to the police. That was the brief thing. But what happened is that the Kashmir police lost the file. Right? So conveniently, they lost the file, which could have established whether the truth of what had happened, right? And so it's this idea of that, your life can be unmade and remade by files. That is something that the terror accused knows. So in Qayyum's narrative, we see that he knows that in order to show his version of the truth, he needs to get access to these documents. He needs to put these documents on record or prove that these documents exist. It's not that he needs to prove he needs to prove his narrative is right, but he needs documents to prove it. So the access to documents becomes very important. And there's this short story by Jorge Borges, this Argentinian author, who talks about this magical encyclopedia. The moment you read it, it becomes true, right? So it's this magical encyclopedia about this fake world that has a different language, different currency, different people. So every time people read it, so currency suddenly starts appearing. People from that magical world appear. So it's something like that. Right, that happens over here. That your life that you did not recognize, that your past history that you did not know as your own, suddenly becomes yours. And so you're forced to confront that alternative past for you. And so that's what the documents do. It's making you confront a form of reality that you don't recognize anymore.
Yeah, and this obsession with documentation is like really pervades through the justice system. So many years back, I was helping an under trial prisoner get bail. I mean, he had already got bail, and 3 years had gone by, and he was still in prison because he couldn't produce surety. So finally, we helped him get surety, and the magistrate is hearing the case, and the magistrate says, "I need an ID document to release him." And we were like, but he's standing here in front of you. He doesn't have anything. He's lost his driving license. He doesn't have any other proof of identification. He's a migrant worker in Bangalore. And the magistrate just refused to grant bail, just because the person didn't have an ID. I mean, the person was in prison, standing in front of, but we really obsess over this idea of documentation.
Yeah, no, I think it's a particularly South Asian thing, that if you don't have a document, you don't exist. Yeah. So there's an old Roman maxim which is I can't say it in Latin, but basically it does not exist if it's not in the file. So similarly, you need a document to prove even your existence.
Exactly, and I think maybe some of that comes from colonial times when the British had this notion of native duplicity, and that this idea that Indians were always forging or faking things.
Yeah, but it's interesting because we still have that idea, right? We can't trust it. We need a document, but you can't trust the document, which is why you have this multiplication of different identity forms, right? That this driving license could be forged. Oh, let's get your Aadhaar card. Oh, this Aadhaar number, who knows, right? So it's this idea that you constantly need more and more documents. So it's not that you have a document, suddenly everything becomes true. It's you just have an obsession with documents to produce more and more.
Yeah, like I've often thought, why do we need affidavits attached to pleadings?
Can become.
Shall we just come to that? We'll have question and answers after the discussion. Yeah, so what I was saying was, I've often thought, why do we actually need affidavits at the end of pleadings? Why does the litigant have to, say that everything that is said is the truth? Don't we assume that what the litigant has said is true? Does that notary's signature actually make that true?
I guess what I would say is, I guess the bigger question is, why do we need it, right? So that's a big question. I guess the smaller question is that, at least for the terror accused I'm talking about, the absence of a signature is a big thing, right? Because then you can say, listen, the guy did not sign it, right? How can you rely on it if the guy did not sign it? The guy did not sign it because he knew that what he said was untrue, right? So I think it's these kind of things which I think I don't know. So I guess the big question is, why do we need it? But the smaller question, I still think it's an important question, is that because we're so obsessed with documents, the fact of these small things allows people to kind of insert themselves in the case. Yeah. Yeah,
and just double-clicking on the idea of people inserting themselves into this case. So a lot of this, what you call the recycled legality, is based on, terror accused learning about the law, creating their own, drafting their own pleadings. How do you think that will be affected by digitization, computerization? Now, a lot of courts have mandatory e-filing. So, this idea that the people who are accused of crimes can kind of pick up law on the go and, represent themselves. Do you think that will be affected by these changes?
I guess yes and no. I think I was speaking to some lawyers. I'm working on the other projects. I'm speaking to lawyers in Delhi. So what they found was, in a lot of UAPA cases right now, because they're arresting like tens of people, like 50, 60 types of people, and the charge sheets go into like tens of thousands of pages, right? So how do you get documents to every single person, right? That's part of the procedure, is that once you're accused of something, you have to know the charges you're accused of and the evidence, that is the documents which you have a right to, right? So then they're like, okay, now all of you pay 10,000 rupees or something like that. And like, we can't pay 10,000 rupees, we're in jail. Like, where are we supposed to get the money from? And then it's like, okay, we'll give it to you on a pen drive. But if you're giving it on a pen drive, then we need an access to a computer in jail, right? And so it's these things which I think, but ultimately, in this particular case that I'm talking about, they ultimately gave it in a documentary form because that was the easiest, if not the most, and definitely not the most cost-effective thing to do, but that was the easiest thing to do, and something that's mandated by law, right? So I guess in the lower courts at least, and which also, things like if you, on the pure kind of straightforward litigation level, the idea for example, an e-court is something that really deprives you of an ability to speak, right? You can't speak to your lawyer if you're through video conferencing. You can't speak to your family if you're video conferencing. You can't speak to other accused in different cities if you're on video conferencing, right? But what some defense lawyers are saying is that they're inviting video conferencing because they know when in a criminal trial, I have to identify a person. Sorry, Leah. Identify Leah as the person who committed the crime. I'm a witness, identify Leah, right? But if you're on a video screen, the connection is hazy, that is a way in which you can say that the identification, or you can challenge the identification, right? So it kind of cuts both ways. On a pure kind of fair trial, that kind of level, I think it probably is harmful to the accused, but there are ways in which I think these, like I said, the itinerary of these technical things isn't actually clear. For example, if I didn't get my charge sheet in hard copy form, I can say I get a discharge because I did not get my charge sheet. So I think, yeah, I think it's not clear what will happen. Yeah.
Something that struck me when I read your book was, the shambolic state of the legal aid system. So a lot of these terror suspects now, they have to figure out the law and start defending themselves because they have inept lawyers, inept or compromised lawyers. So just wanted your thoughts on that. I mean, why is it that we don't have good enough legal aid to represent these people?
So I guess two things. One, so this is the defendants. I don't want to impugn, as fellow lawyers ourselves, I don't want to impugn the good standing of lawyers, but not that it, anyways. But I think these are terror accused who are very suspicious. Like, so coming back to the rumors, right? They're very suspicious of everything that's happening. So, and lawyers are also overburdened. Like, we have, like, there's a case every single day. I don't have time to speak to you. But then the terror accused be like, oh, he didn't speak to me because of something else. Right? There's constant fear of what's happening and what could be a deeper reason behind silence or doing something else. So that's definitely a terror accused thing. I think. So in Delhi right now, they have something called remand lawyers. There's a defense lawyer in every court. I don't know this position in other jurisdictions. But I think the point is that people who are supposed to be well versed in the law also don't know the law, right? So one of the judges, prosecutors, government officials, they're supposed to know it. And they can be caught off guard. So the question isn't so much of, I don't know. I mean, you could say quality of lawyers is bad or judges is bad, which is true. But however good you are, you will never know the law completely. So in one of the chapters, I talk about this small technical procedure to file terrorism cases where it wasn't being complied with, right? And somehow everyone, for 8 years, people had not realized that this was a requirement. And someone found it. So it's this idea of like sudden shifts of meaning, sudden new procedures, that's constant. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe it is like, even in the practice of medicine, we see this, that it is the patient who has to do a lot of work and really, I mean, if you have a chronic, rare kind of disease, then the patient really has to put in a lot of effort to understand their own condition, and you can't just rely on the doctor. So maybe it's like that with criminal lawyers as well. I mean, the accused is the most invested in it. So.
Yeah, because they're going through it, they don't trust anyone. There's a feeling of being left alone because your family can't visit. The only people who you have are your people in the high security ward. And so there's a great amount of investment, which is really surprising because they sustain the investment not just for 1-2 years, but like 10, 14, 15 years. So yeah.
Okay, zooming out a little, I wanted to just talk a little bit about UAPA, which was supposed to be this exception. It was supposed to create a sphere of exclusion. And now it has really been normalized. Like recently, some college students who were cheering for Pakistan in the World Cup were arrested, or I mean, an FIR was filed against them under UAPA. So, really farcical UAPA cases are being filed, And as most of you know, it's very difficult to get bail under UAPA. You end up spending a lot of time in prison. So just wanted your thoughts on this normalization of UAPA.
Yeah. So one of the cases, one of the instances when we were doing the Simi tribunal, one of the instances was according to the police, this policeman is walking down the road, and then he suddenly hears someone saying in Maharashtra, he was seeing someone in Maharashtra in his house saying Khalistan should be free. So he went and arrested them. It turns out they have some in between some dispute. But so I think this idea of ridiculous charges is always there. Like there's always been ridiculous charges under UAPA. because you can arrest on such flimsy grounds that you arrest and ask question later. So you arrest, you're in jail. If it's one FIR, you're in police custody for what, 30 days. You can be up in judicial custody, pre-charge for up to 180 days. And like you said, it's virtually impossible to get bail, right? And so I think what's happened is that, two things have probably happened. One is that under the UAPA bail statute is being replicated elsewhere. So it's replicated in PMLA, the law that the ED is using to target people. It's being replicated in, for example, Kerala recently passed an alcohol-related bill. It's being replicated over there, right? So it's really strict bail conditions, where it's impossible to get bail. You have to be effectively prove your innocence before you can get bail, which doesn't make sense, especially if it's for bail, right? But I guess the broader question is like what, for example, what implication does it have for democracy? What implication does it have for people? And that's a very dark one, right? The fact that you can be arrested for saying Pakistan should win the match is really ridiculous. You may be offended by it, but it's clearly not a national security issue, right? And I think what's happening is that, like, many defense lawyers are kind of going back. It's not, forget guilt or innocence. We want the proper procedure to be followed. It's like, so it's this, like they say, I mean, I guess the law kind of undoes itself in these things. If you want a proper procedure to be followed, and then you have UAPA, PMLA, people are going to use these laws for everything, which is what's happening. And it's so flimsy. Like, you can be arrested and you ask question later. It's just, some of the narratives, we're doing this recent study, is just ridiculous of why people are being arrested for UAPA. But there's no check on police accountability. Magistrates are, who are the first point of contact for this, getting the vibes from above, saying that, national security, don't do anything. So they don't do anything. And there's this idea, again, in the realm of rumor, that if you do anything, then you'll be transferred out, you'll be put under, like, motor vehicles case or something like, something like a punishment posting for trial court judge. But yeah, it's quite a dark place that is headed to.
And I also think that the media coverage of UAPA cases is also very skewed. So at the time of arrest, the person's name is revealed, they'll hound the families, and nobody actually follows the trial, because some of the accounts that you have in your book, of completely fabricated cases. And, at the end, the judge is also saying that this is a completely fabricated case. That will be on page 3, page 4. Nobody is reading that, So even if a person gets acquitted, one, they have spent so much time in jail. Secondly, their reputation is gone. I mean, the long-term effects of it are really significant.
Yeah, especially because UAPA cases are such a long arc, right? They go on for decades. We're not talking about years, like decades. And so by the time someone's acquitted, like, who cares? Like, it comes in the news. But also the interesting thing is now, like, just talking to judges, lawyers recently, is that lawyers who do UAPA cases, is that judges themselves be like, oh, I saw this on live law, oh, I got this WhatsApp forward. We're talking about that, and that kind of influences what they're thinking, I think. It's this, so even if there's not kind of direct pressure, it's clearly in the air, right? So they get updates from live law, bar and bench, et cetera, and they know what's happening, or NDTV, and it's just, it's in the air almost. It's like, it's what they're breathing every day.
Yeah, and I feel that this denial of bail under special statutes like UAPA, NDPS, although the number is low, I mean, there aren't that many cases under these special statutes, but it has a chilling effect on other bail cases. And, at Daksh, we've analyzed bail cases in the high courts, and we see a huge increase in the last 3 years or so. And if bail cases are reaching high courts, that means that magistrates and session courts are denying bail routinely.
Yeah.
So I think there is a kind of chilling effect that comes from these special statutes.
No, absolutely. And the fact that you have people's bail pending in the Supreme Court for, like, what, a year now? Something like that. It's just, I mean, that shows that people below the judges below have there's some issue there. And I guess bail is so discretionary, right? It makes a difference. So these people who don't get bail are more than likely to be acquitted, right? So the conviction rates for these things are quite stark. So the conviction rates the statistics aren't reliable, but what we've been able to figure out, I think, is that for Tada cases, this is on a government submission to the NHRC, is that out of 70,000 arrests, only 400 people were ever convicted, right? So people spend years in jail, because once you get arrested, you can't come out on bail, like now. And I think PUDR, PUCL had another report recently, but the conviction was 2%. So you get arrested under these cases, but you can't come out. You spend years in jail and then finally acquitted. So at least because I think maybe the trial is so technical that you have to think about evidence, et cetera, but bail is so discretionary that they're like, I'm not going to exercise my discretion because nothing here, there's nothing here to allow me to feel safe in giving someone bail. The moment you say national security, everyone's like, oh no, we can't.
Yeah, the process becomes the punishment.
Yeah.
And that is, at least in the special statutes, a feature and not a bug.
Yeah.
I think because the conviction rate is so low,
Yeah.
people think that, okay, we'll just keep them in prison for 7-8 years and that will just serve as the punishment.
And I think what else is happening in these special statutes is that trial is irrelevant. Like, no one cares about the trial. What is actually is all the pre-trial stuff. So what's happening now is like getting basic documents, access to the FIR, access to charge sheet, access to your lawyer. These become issues, right? And this delays processes much longer. So lawyers are increasingly saying that, the pre-trial stage goes on for years because they just want to keep us in jail, and every little thing becomes a fight. So you have to go to the High Court to get a copy of the FIR. That's crazy because you have a right to a FIR, right? You have to go to the High Court to get a copy of the charge sheet. Like, so these small things take, and you can't not let it go either. Because if you don't have a copy of the charge sheet, how are you supposed to prepare your defense, right? But you can't. But they know that you have to fight it, so they're luring you into a trap to fight it. And it's the pre-trial thing that I think takes the longest time. Actually, it's like the trial is irrelevant because everyone knows that at the end of it you'll get acquitted. So it's the pre-trial that's keeping people in jail much longer.
Yeah, it's quite a crazy situation.
Yeah.
I'd like to leave some space for audience questions, so I'll just come to my last question. This is again a larger systemic problem. So from your accounts and from whatever we see also through our research, there's the huge impunity that the police have. There are arbitrary arrests, there are these fabricated cases, and we hardly hear of any police person being held accountable for this. Also, procedurally, we don't see magistrates hauling the police up. For example, the example that you just gave of a person being arrested, not getting access to the FIR or not knowing what they're being charged with. That person should just be released, I would say. The magistrate should say, if you have not told the person why he's being arrested, the person is going to be released. But we don't see any of that kind of accountability. And why do you think that's the case?
I can only say what I think lawyers have told me because I haven't spoken to any magistrates. But what the sense I'm getting is that, one, it's in the air, right? That they get the sense from higher courts that, if someone is accused of PMLA, UAPA, don't touch it or delay it or give it to someone else, right? Kick the ball, right? Make it someone else's problem. And what lawyers have been saying is that, the judge traditionally thought of as a referee, right? But now the judge is acting almost like a player, right? Is acting for one side. Also, I think, and this comes back to kind of legal training and stuff, I think some certain fundamentals, I just think as a collective community, lawyers and judges have forgotten fundamentals of why the law is a certain way that it is. Why do you need to have a copy of a FIR, right? And so, and suddenly, and this uncertainty, this hava, this atmosphere is allowing judges to ask that, why do you need a copy of the FIR? Show me where it's written. And then it's, because it's such a fundamental thing, it's like driving on one side of the road. It's such a fundamental thing, we don't think about it. But like, how do you know you're supposed to drive on that side of the road? Who told you? Where is it written? So then you go around scrambling for that. So I think it's these things. I mean, small things. Another example that a lawyer gave, is that he wanted to object during cross-examination in a UAPA case. The judge said, no, you can't object during a cross-examination. It's like, show me the provision where it says you can object. So then you're like,
Every Hindi movie.
Yeah, basically, every Hindi movie. Yeah. So I think, I think it's the atmosphere of what pressure, on, direct or indirect pressure, but also like what, and this pressure allows them to just question fundamentals of law that we haven't thought of.
Okay, I'll now open it up to audience questions. Yeah. Nick has a mic.
Good evening, sir.
Hi.
How this dubious and fabricated process affects the national security indirectly, in addition to the rights perspective?
Thank you. You should answer
Do you
or?
want to have a few questions and then you
Yeah,
want to answer?
Yeah.
Okay, so in the first place, I would like to differ with that. Like when you said, no, like it is a South Asian thing. Like with the documents, I work for 2 American companies. They also require a lot of documents. So I
I'm
think it's a world thing. So for just that. But apart from that, on the ethnographic studies, because I've done cephalological studies myself in Delhi, I did not find a lot of data, to be honest, on ground to do any kind of a statistical analysis. So for your research or the book, how did you go about it? Did you collect the data from the courts, or did you do any of the other inside research as well?
Okay, thank you.
That was really fascinating, and I have many questions, but I'll try and limit myself to 2, if I may. One is, what you were talking about, the Qayyum's case and fascinating how he got the logs. But we know that the police can create entire encounters, killing people, stage the scenes. What is it about the written word that actually prevents them from going back and fabricating a document when the court or the RTI asks for the document? I'm wondering about that. And in this context, will digitization make a difference because it perhaps gets set in stone a little bit more? The other question was on, you're talking about how the technicalities are being used for release. And I don't have any, I haven't studied this, but just from perusal of reports where people are getting bail, for example, very often I find the courts are doing it on technicalities rather than challenging it from a justice perspective, as this is a crazy case. They don't say that, perhaps because of that feeling in the air that you're talking about, that they should not challenge a terror case, but they're using technicalities perhaps as a space for themselves to grant some kind of relief. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Okay, thank you so much. So maybe just taking the questions in order. So I think you're right. So I think and I'm not a security specialist, so I can't answer the question. I think the fact that you have such targeted prosecutions of communities is something that's bound to come up somewhere, right? And I'm saying this just as a hunch, not as someone who's this thing. Because if you're going to target people, it's going to it creates an atmosphere where they're like, okay, we can't. The democratic process is closed off to us. The justice process is closed off to us. What else? What other avenue is there to make a claim over here? How else can I do it, right? And there's another issue regarding the integrity of the criminal justice process itself, right? We want a criminal justice process that works. We want guilty people to go to prison or to be punished. We want innocent people to be set free, right? But if you're undermining the fundamentals of the criminal justice process such a way, you can't be sure of that. The acquittal rates are so high in UAPA cases that even people who may have actually done things we do not like are being acquitted, right? So it's affecting the integrity of the process itself. People say we need exceptional laws to deal with exceptional violence. What's actually happening is these exceptional laws are undermining the very security that the state is trying to claim, right? Coming to documents, I stand corrected. Everyone's obsessed with documents. But there's also, anyway, we can talk more about that. But in terms of this research, what I did was I filed an RTI to the Delhi High Court saying, give me all of the UAPA prosecutions currently going on in all the trial courts. They gave me a list. It was an incomplete list because I knew of cases that weren't on that list that they gave me. Now it's very difficult because people do not care about the RTI anymore. I file several RTIs, no one replies, everyone, is a kind of lackadaisical or, they have, again, the atmosphere that you don't have to reply to RTIs anymore. But now actually, we're on a project where we're going through the eCourts website and kind of like basically manually looking at each and every UAPA case. Which is why I have the number of 3,427 people arrested under UAPA since 2014. But I think even for me, the book and the current research project is that we know that the data is always inadequate. Certain states don't put up data. Or for example, UP, because UAPA, they get often when they put it up in the kind of the form, the letters get transposed. So you have to go through every UP act to make sure it's not a UAPA case. So that's a thing. But even otherwise, the data is never complete in a sense. So coming to the last question, so I think you're right. But I would, so no one's making, for example, I don't think you'll ever find a case that people say that in the larger incidents of justice, we are acquitting this person. Or we know that this person was accused because he was a Muslim or a Dalit or a Maoist, etc., etc. But what I think is the space that law creates is that it allows you to think of justice in very technical terms, right? Because the case at hand is not one of freedom of expression, not freedom of religion, not freedom of association. It's one of, am I guilty of doing certain things? Right? And so that's the technical space of it, right? And terror accused think of this as a form of justice, right? It may be delayed justice, but at least I got it out after this period of time. And I've forgotten the first part of your question.
On documents, what prevents them from fabricating them?
That's right. So the thing about Bal Gopal in one article, who's a famous human rights lawyer, basically once said of the Andhra police that they hate encounters. They rather just murder someone and bury them somewhere. Why do they hate encounters? Because the moment you have an encounter is you have to produce paperwork, right? And then the moment you produce paperwork, the paperwork could be undermined by itself. Simple things like, was it stamped? Right? Was it countersigned? Did the ink match the pen that you had that day? That level stuff, right? But also, the fact that the moment you have something documentary, you can produce other documents, right? If you have, so we know that police will often fabricate stuff, right? So for example, in Qayyum's case, what happened was, one of the reasons why he was acquitted is that the police says he was arrested on day X, right? 3 days before that, his wife has filed a missing persons complaint in Srinagar, right? So the moment the police say they were arrested on day X, he said, no, my wife filed a missing persons complaint, right? So the moment you do that, it's this multiplication of documents, which is a problem for police, right? So they fabricate a document, but that fabricated document will contradict another document they had somewhere else, right? So it's this multiplication that's a problem. So every time you fabricate, you have to continue the lie, basically, and you can't do that over so many documents.
Any more questions?
And I think
do you have any other mode in mind other than writing?
No. So that's the problem. It's also the mode of success. That the credibility of 100% credibility of documents can never be certain. Also, that the sign will be missing. So a document is not just me writing, right? So when I write, let's say I'm writing a seizure statement. Yeah, like that. For like when you kabza karo property, right? Like that type of thing. I'll write it, right? I have to write it. I have to sign it. I'll have to get Leah to countersign it. I'll have to file a copy somewhere else, right? So the moment I have to do all of that, it introduces uncertainty in the process. So all of these things which are aimed to certify a document actually produce uncertainty in the process. I don't know if I answered your question. Okay.
Yes. Then there are a lot of fabrications here and there happening. So how one can save from these things? Suppose for myself or something happening to my relative, so as a common citizen, what should I do? if something is going to happen for me or for my family. Yeah, files, all the fabrications. If that is happening for Muslims or you name anybody, of course it's going to happen to him or myself or to anybody. So what a person should do for that?
So there's a book by Abdul Wahid Sheikh called Beguna Kaidi. I think it's Innocent Prisoners in English. So it gives you a detailed how to survive the police. And it's an amazing book because it tells you if the police are torturing you, sign any document they give you. It's fine, right? Because you know that they can't use that in court because it's a confession. You can't use it in court, right? If the police say implicate your mother or your father, give them a random person's name, right? But I think so, and it's funny. But that book is searing in its criticism of what you should. It's searing. It's really difficult to read because you see the amount of violence that takes place in prisons, in courtrooms, right? And it's a how to. Literally, it's a how to survive the legal process. So sign every document. Make friends in jail. I mean, I don't know. I have never been, so I feel a bit weird, like, telling you this. It's an awkward question. But I think that book is probably a better guide than I could ever give anyone. Beguna Kaidi, but I think in English it's called Innocent Prisoners. Yeah.
Any more questions?
As I said, I have a lot of questions, so if nobody does, I can keep asking. On the use of violence, as you're saying, it's hard to even read about this. And I haven't read your book yet, but what Leah said was also these anecdotes about, individual police officers being complicated. Of course, as individuals, they might be, but the violence is, of course, systemic. There are orders in the jail to beat up certain kind of prisoners, etc. So is what you have described in your book an exception?
No, but I think even in those instances where the orders come, there are modes of negotiation, right? So I was reading Kobart Gandhi's memoirs, right? And he talks about this violence in jail, right? And since 2011, I think there are 12 terror memoirs, which is his own genre of writing now, I think. But it's just interesting about the modes of negotiation that you can do in prison. So it's a violent place, but how do you negotiate with all the people that are there in order to lessen or mitigate that violence? And it's kind of these modes of negotiation which I think are interesting, right? So it's not as if, because, like for example, in what's her name? So Sudha Bharadwaj's book, she talks about the police, the jailer felt bad for this person who had a child, gave her extra sweets, something like that. So there are modes in which people kind of make life there. It's not a happy life, and it's that mode that I'm interested in. Like in a violent space, how do you make your life possible? So if there are orders coming from above saying beat up this prison, what do you do in that situation? Beat up this person. What do you do in that situation in order to mitigate, avoid violence next time? What trade-offs do you have to do? Like it's that kind of stuff which I think which comes across really strongly in these memoirs as well. Because they talk about this. They talk about being beaten up in jail, how an order comes from someone, how people undergo sexual violence in jail, right? So it's these negotiations with not just inmates, but with jailing officers, with kind of the dadas in the prison as well. So there's a lot of that there. So it's violence, but there's also a place of negotiation, I think is what my response would be.
Yeah, and I think, what you had said, people are complicated and no one is 100% good or 100% bad, Even I've seen, when I worked with under trials that, the same cops who had arrested them on completely fabricated cases would tell, oh my God, you're still in jail, why have you not got bail, how's your family? Yeah. And you're like, why did you put him in prison in the first place? But, that's how it is.
Yeah. Yeah, yes.
One more question, sir. How the recent RTA Amendment Act impacts this record-seeking process, actually? That means with respect to UAP Acts.
I don't know the recent amendments to the RTI Act. It increases the number of grounds to reduce to...
Not numerically, but qualitatively how it affects.
I don't know, to be honest. I don't know how it affects... what I do know, from my own personal experience, is that government officials aren't responding to RTI anymore, right? And the fact that they know you'll have to appeal, the appellate boards aren't fully staffed. I don't know if there's even a chief information commissioner at the moment. But they know that even if you have a legitimate ground for information, you still won't have things. But what's interesting is that people are still using it. Like, so some people who I've met recently, basically the lawyers talk about how the accused are still using the RTI Act, right? And so whether it's the RTI Act, modes of petitioning, getting your family members to file for you. There was one instance where this lawyer narrated to me that the defendant couldn't get access to a certain document in jail, and they would keep on refusing him, saying that you are in prison, we cannot deliver something to prison, right? So then he got his brother or someone to get the document from the police. Because then in that case, they had to give notice to the person, to the defendant, saying that your information about you has been requested, and then so he sent, so you have my consent to all that. So, but I think those instances are few and far between now. But these are just personal anecdotes, so I don't know what exactly is happening.
Thanks a lot, Mayur. This was a great book. I urge all of you to pick up a copy. The publisher has set up a stand outside. Thanks a lot to BIC for hosting this discussion. Of course, thanks to all of you for coming here and listening to this.